One of our students, Marco, came to me and said he'd found a bunch of questions online asking about which were the best books for learning HTML and CSS and I think JavaScript. And so I was thinking, well, I have opinions on that and I can make a little video about it. And then he can share the video to help answer those people's questions. So I brought in a bunch of books. A pretty big bag of books, as you can see here. These are just some books I've collected over the years, and I thought I would just kind of go over them in order. I certainly don't have all of the books, and there's a lot of books, but I'm going to try to put these into two piles because I kind of think that learning HTML and CSS is sort of its own world, whereas learning JavaScript is kind of its own world. And then you sort of put them together, and then that's that. But clearly there's been thousands of books, or at least hundreds of books on CSS and HTML over the years. So learning HTML is kind of a weird thing because people, it's a weird looking language, or what you could argue that it's not a language if you want, or whatever you want to do. But the point is, its syntax is unlike other languages, and because of that, there's this sort of starting tag and this sort of ending tag. People tend to memorize it and just copy what they see instead of really create a mental or conceptual model. There's my friend Joe. And so this causes a lot of problems, I think. But that's how traditionally it's been taught, as look what I'm doing, copy this. So one of the first books on HTML and CSS I got was probably the second edition of this book, but Designing with Web Standards by good old Jeffrey Zeldman and Ethan Marcotte. And this is a really important book. I recently bought it again to, I think I usually buy books and then read them and then give them to a friend in the hopes that they'll be able to learn from them. But nowadays, since I'm teaching these classes and stuff like that, I keep all the books and I organize them and have lots and lots of notes in them so I can reference them and share it with people. But this book is really, really good. It's probably one of the most important books for all HTML and CSS in history. But also, it's not that it's outdated, but it's that a lot of the things that it's talking about, like all the browser differences and the need to create shared web standards between all the browsers and between all the people who are writing HTML and CSS, it's just not the book I would go to right now. I'll have to make an entire video on this book later and why, maybe its history of why it's so important. But it's really good to have if you would like to look at the history of how some of these decisions were made. And it was really fun to read it again, for sure. But I wouldn't recommend you just go pick this up as your first introduction to HTML. What else we got? Okay, here's this book, HTML and CSS. And I bought this book because I already knew how to program pretty well, and I already knew HTML and CSS very well. But I saw this in Barnes & Noble when I was just waiting for a friend to hurry up, and it's so beautiful. It's just such a beautiful book. It tells you the opening tag and the closing tag, and it's all beautiful. But the problem that I have with this book is that it does that. It says, here's the opening tag. This is how HTML works. There's tags. There's an opening tag. There's a closing tag. So you put the tags like this, and then you put IDs, and then you put classes. And to me, that's a way to copy and learn how to write things, but it's not a way to learn how to think about things. It's not a way to learn how to think about the fact that web documents are about hierarchy, and they're really kind of copying Word documents and essays and books and things like that, and getting a solid core foundational understanding of hierarchy and basically understanding why you write HTML, how the computer is going to read the HTML, how the other humans are going to need to also read the HTML as authors, how it's going to be painted to the screen, and how all of these sort of key value pairs behind the scenes work, to me is a lot more important than memorizing there's a tag at the front and a tag at the back. And I think as beautiful as this book is, I think that it kind of teaches that way. But if you do get a hold of this book, if somebody has this book lying around, it's certainly worth reading. I just think it's just a little off, but it's really cool. It's a good book. Another more recent book is this form design patterns. There's lots of good books on forms from the past. This one takes a very contemporary look at how the conversation around web accessibility and how keeping things lean and really using HTML for its qualities instead of trying to replace them with all these JavaScript things on top of it. This isn't just only about HTML. This is specifically about forms. So it gets a little too specific, and it's maybe for later in your career when you're making a lot of forms and when you've learned a lot more HTML. So I don't think this book is really the right book to start with either. Then I got this book recently, this CSS book, and everyone means well in all of these books. They do. They sure do. And I know CSS really well, and I teach CSS all the time. I help people with CSS daily on Stack Overflow and in Discord and through all sorts of different forums and friends and things. So I talk about CSS a lot, and I teach CSS to a lot of people. And I worked on CSS every day for the last 10 years or so for hours and hours and hours. And I think this book, again, I think that it's teaching you, here's how to do CSS, here's the order of how it's, IDs are more important than classes, so those are going to win out in the cascade and blah, 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 blah. Again, I think that's a certain way to think about it, but I don't think it's the most useful way to think about it. And I also don't think that it connects to HTML. Like, you kind of have to learn these things together. HTML is describing the content. CSS is making very strong suggestions about how this content should be displayed visually. I read the whole thing cover to cover to make sure that I'm not missing anything or that there's not already some amazing book that does everything I'm trying to teach perfectly. This one didn't do it, but if you have it and you want to read it, I still think you'd learn a lot from it. Okay, so HTML, CSS, there's lots and lots and lots of CSS books, and I've read and looked over a lot of them. Let's see what some other HTML type things. This book, Chris Coyer's book, Practical SVG, it's not really HTML, but I use SVG a lot, and it's kind of an XML format. So it's sort of HTML-ish, and it's really good. That's super useful. But it's technical, right? Like, you don't really need to understand the conceptual importance of hierarchy and stuff. This is kind of like its own little world of little graphics and numbers and stuff like that. So this is a resource that could be used at any time in your career. And any time that you want to start using SVGs in your work more regularly and you want to learn all the ins and outs of that. Big fan. More recently, there's this Get Ready for CSS Grid layout from Rachel Andrew. And, everyone on the internet can tell you there's free. You can read it for free everywhere. You can learn grid. Go learn grid. Go learn grid. And that's true. There are free things everywhere. They're not really free because they're selling your attention for ads and things like that while you're there. But my point is, out of all the millions of free things you could look at, that could take you tons of hours of finding stuff out. I watched all the YouTube videos saying, grid's going to change everything. Grid, 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 grid. And I fought grid for a long time. I said, listen, the browser support's not good enough yet. I don't need to put it in my work. It's confusing. The syntax is ugly. I can do everything with Flexbox. Why do it? But this book right here, I bought it because, I like to give my money to people because they spend all this time like simplifying it for me. Like, I read this book begrudgingly and by the end of it, I just knew what CSS Grid was, and now I love it. And you just kind of have to use the parts of it that work for you and write it in a way that is readable and fun and intuitive, and then you'll get all the benefits of it. And yeah, everyone jumps out of the nearby bush and screams, "Don't pay for anything. You can read the documentation. There's a blog post. You can watch a tutorial. You can do all this stuff for free. Don't ever pay anybody in this industry to actually make something and put all their time and heart and energy into creating something to help you, and don't ever pay them, right? Because we, as our own practitioners, don't want to ever be paid or something. I'm not really sure where the logic is there. So these little books, $10, $20 here or there, can save you 20 hours of confusion and work. It's like they're free. It's like they're giving you hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of your time back to you. So don't be cheap. So that's HTML and CSS. There's a whole bunch of books about it, and there are tons and tons of documentation, and everyone in the world apparently who learns CSS or HTML immediately goes out and writes a blog post like, hey, I just learned it. I can now teach it. I can go teach you everything I learned by just basically retyping the docs I just saw. Not really sure what the point of that is. But all of those things, no matter how good they are, miss the core reasons for writing HTML, and I think that will stick with you your whole career. I think people will write HTML as that annoying thing they have to do to get stuff on the page so they can write JavaScript, when really HTML itself and content strategy and architecture of information architecture and all that stuff, if you think about it while you're writing the HTML, while you're working small screen to big screen, while you're negotiating how much space you have and what kind of content needs to be shown there and how to get your story across and how to have be optimized for search engines to crawl it and for everything to be interlinked all like the internet is supposed to be. That's what's important. That's if you learn that, then you can learn HTML and see it as just a toolbox of stuff to help you get to your goal, which I'll talk about a little further on. Okay, so HTML, CSS, we talked about that a little. Put that aside, compartmentalize that for a second, and let's talk about JavaScript books. This is a pretty famous JavaScript book, JavaScript, The Good Parts. But I didn't get that book first. I'm pretty sure I got this Eloquent JavaScript book. And this book is known for being, a really great book. A lot of people swear by it. It's actually fully available online, I think, just in a GitHub repo, and you could read it there. I like to buy things because I can, make little marks in them and stuff like that. And so I was really digging it. I was like, this is so funny. There's all this story of this like werewolf squirrel, and it's really personable and it's great. And it gets to this part where it starts talking about like a lot of math though, and maybe it's just me, but at that part, I had a hard time with it. It started to feel really confusing, and so I don't think there is a best book. I think there's a best book for each person. Some people might think this is the best book for them, and that's great. I think it's just not written for me. It's a little bit off for me. And so at the same time, I think I bought this other book. I probably bought the first edition, I'm not sure. But this Secrets of the JavaScript Ninja. And you know how I don't like talking about programming as it's for ninjas or rock stars, but we'll forgive them on this one book. Secrets of the JavaScript Ninja feels like it's another version of this. Like they both cover all the same stuff, but like this one feels like it's a little bit for the math-minded, and this one's a little bit for a different type of person. This book tells you an introduction, then it tells you like another introduction, then it tells you a little bit about it, then it goes back over it. Like each concept, it reiterates itself a lot. So if you already know everything about JavaScript, this might seem a little redundant, but if you're learning, it's really helpful because it gets the idea in your head and then you're thinking about it, you try some stuff. This has lots of challenges. This has lots of challenges. This has like an actual editor that you can use online and run your code. This doesn't. But I think having an editor to run your code online is bad for you. You should be using it in a real developer environment like you're going to be in real life. So I'm not going to say this book is better than this book, but I like this book better for me because it kind of speaks my language, and I really got a lot out of it. And it's all updated. I think they both are, but this one's updated with all the newest, coolest JavaScript stuff, and it's just really easy and relatable to me. So if you get a chance, you could probably look at like the first chapter of both of these and sort of decide which one is in your tone of voice that you like. Now, beyond that, there's this one, JavaScript, The Good Parts, which is this classic, but more than that, it's like a bigger concept, which is that JavaScript was, made in, or maybe you don't know, it was made in 10 days under a lot of pressure from the browser companies, and it's not exactly perfect. And so Douglas Crawford likes to talk about how horrible things are, but this book, the concept behind it is don't use the problem areas, just stick with the happy path, like all the things that work well that don't have weird edge case scenarios, and you'll be good. And I think that that is a really good concept to learn, even if you don't like JavaScript or you don't like that Douglas Crawford decided to write JSON so that it has to have no closing, no ending. Sometimes I don't know what the sentence was before. I make a messed up sentence, and then I don't know how to just finish the sentence, but then I'd have to stop it and rewind it.
Yeah, just start.
It's a lot of work to make these things. Okay. Anyway, JavaScript, The Good Parts here, is written by a crotchety old man named Douglas Crawford, who's awesome. Hi, Mom. How's it going? Another really good book, since we're talking about books, we're talking about like starting books to learn. There's 20 other JavaScript books I would recommend, depending on what part of your journey you're on. So what we're talking about here, these three, Eloquent JavaScript, in case I didn't say it aloud, Eloquent JavaScript, Secrets of the JavaScript Ninja, 2nd edition, JavaScript, The Good Parts, and then Up and Going with JavaScript. This is kind of like the introduction. This is by Kyle Simpson, who takes where everybody has left off and really explains JavaScript in a I guess I'll say unique way. Well, he explains it in the way it should be taught, whereas variables are not boxes that hold information. That's just not true. That's not how it works. What you do is you save some data in memory, and then if you don't have any way to call upon it, then it just gets trash collected. So you got your data up here in memory, and you have to like tie a string to it, basically. I mean, he doesn't say it like that, but it's like a balloon almost. You're using the name of the variable to be able to talk about this piece of data that's in memory. And so it's not just this simplified version of you put some information in a box. That's not how variables in JavaScript work. And so he goes through the entire conversation that the interpreter has, which is, oh, here's some data. That's nice. Oh, here's a reference that we're creating, a variable. And then here, oh, let's point this data to, let's point the reference, the variable, to the data. And so, now we have a way to reference this data in memory. And when you go through this, he explains it a million times better than that. It could be too complicated for you. But this is the up and going one. And I really think that being able to understand how the interpreter thinks through this and how JavaScript works will save you a lot of pain in the future. I mean, I did not learn it this way, and then I had to work back through relearning JavaScript basically later in my career. And if you can get some of these basics down early and then marry it with this stuff, that's a really good start. Then Kyle also has all of these other books that get into much more detail. Maybe depending on where you are in your career, async and performance might not be right for you, or types and grammar or something might be too specific. So these are kind of, I would say, you go with this up and going as an introduction to the language, and then you start to look at these later as you're using the language and you have more understanding of it and what you're working with, so that these things, you can actually apply them to what you're building. But these are also available free on the internet if you want to read them in digital form. But again, I like to buy them. I like to write in them. I like to pass them along to friends. I like to lay them sitting next to me while I'm using my computer, because it's hard to read Apple Books or Kindle or whatever while you're working on something, and I like to read them in bed. Another big, huge part of books is that you're at the computer all day. You don't want to be at the computer when you're not working, when you're studying and all that sort of stuff. So a huge part of books is I can take this book and casually go and read on the couch, get out of computer land. I don't have little messages coming to me. I don't have little notations saying, somebody said something in a chat room and blah, blah, blah. You could take this to the park. You could take a book to the park. So that's another reason why I'd say just buy the Kyle Simpson's books. There's a new version of them out now, and you should just buy them, have them around. Talk to them with your friends at lunch. Anyway, so these are the kind of the beginner JavaScript books that are available. I'm not telling you these are the right way to go yet. I'm still getting there. Okay, but that concludes our introductory to JavaScript books options area. And, I'll make another video about the other 20 JavaScript books you might want to deal with later. But I want you to take what I've said now. We talked about JavaScript books introductory, and we talked about CSS and HTML books introductory. And I've sort of said that I think there's problems with all of these books, or a lot of these books, and I want to explain what that is now, because this isn't me just trying to be a jerk and say these books are terrible or anything. They're all great books. But what I would like to talk about is what I think people should be learning before they start coding, before they start just writing code and stuff, because programming is really just baby talking to the computer, and really we need to be able to know how to talk to ourselves and humans and understand what the goals of all these projects are and how we get there in a bigger picture way before we start getting in there and coding things. What if you were building a house and you just went and started cementing everything up, or like, okay, let's get this plumbing put in. Like, you got to know more about a house before you just start going and doing electrical everywhere. So what I think is pretty much the best book ever is this book, The Elements of User Experience. Now, I didn't find out about this book until, 2016 or something. But when I started reading it, I was thinking, these are all the things I learned the hard way from working in all of these different companies, working in a small design shop, working in a startup, working by myself, doing freelancing, working at a corporate place, working at a fast-paced agency and all this stuff. And all these things I thought just weren't working for the team. Nobody was talking to each other. There's kind of waterfall of stuff happening, and then the coders just have to come in at the end and hopefully clean up the mess. And anyway, I'm not saying that I thought of all these things, but what I'm saying is that throughout your career, you might actually come to all these conclusions on your own. But Mr. Jesse James Garrett here, I think this was written in 2000. So he was he noticed all these things a long time ago. And man, I think the first edition, 2002. If we all read this at the beginning, I think that would be really great. The secret of this book is kind of he drew out this big chart, and that sort of started this book, and the chart really spoke to a lot of people. Let me see if I could just find it really quick. It says surface, skeleton, structure, scope, strategy, and I like to think you can turn it upside down, and then you get strategy. It's a to-do list now. Instead of a layered cake of all of the conceptual models or mental models of how these things line up together, if you turn it over, instead of the core being strategy, it's strategy, let's do that first. to my mind, everyone should read the Elements of User Experience. Even if it doesn't totally all click, just get your mind going. It's fun, it's short, it's fun to read, it has lots of little diagrams and things, and this will get you set up to start thinking like a designer before, like a not a visual designer, a designer, a person who designs programs or designs goals and all the things that we need to do to be people who do this. So the Elements of User Experience, read it. It's short. Just buy it. It's short. Thank Jesse for his hard work of putting this together, and you are going to have such a better understanding of why we are making things. And so when you go to read a book on HTML or you go to read a book on JavaScript, you're going to understand those are just tools to make this stuff happen. Now, beyond this, there's this other book by Steve Krug called Don't Make Me Think. This book is all about, it's everything. It's all about web usability, all these buzzwords we talk about today, right? User experience, user interfaces, content strategy. And it's just, he's very humble. Don't make me think. Make web interfaces that are easy for people to use. Web interfaces that people can go and use. And here's all the ways to do it. Look at how newspapers work. Look at how you group content together so it's easy to see, how to make all the things available and tell a story of like what the user might want to do on this site. So if you start thinking about these, which again are both short, fun books, you can put them on the couch, read them over and over again. If you get these together, you're well on your way of thinking like a user experience designer, like a content strategy person. And then there's some other books you could read about all sorts of stuff as far as information architecture and, research. All these a list apart books, from this company that you should read that I'll talk about in another video. So start with these. These will get your mind ready for the next part. Now, the next part. This book, Exercises for Programmers. It is 57 challenges, and it is language agnostic, which means it doesn't matter really what language you use. There's all sorts of different languages for the web, but in our case, we're talking about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you take this book, the first couple chapters are explaining how to break down problems, how to partial out in your mind how things are, like how things are concerned. Can I make these little tiny functions that do things and then connect them together? What type of information do we need to feed the computer? What type of information do we need to get back from the computer? How do we show things on the screen? And so all of a sudden you're like, okay, HTML and CSS and JavaScript, I'm going to need that stuff. Now, this isn't a book, but if you go to Mozilla Developer Network, they have some really great, well-curated documentation and references for all of the HTML elements, all of the CSS properties like color, background color, different flex and grid layout stuff. So think of them as toolboxes. When you need to make a header for your document, and these will get you ready to know like what that means, right? I want to put something at the top of this document that we're creating, or it asks you in this book to do something. Then you dive into the Mozilla Developer Network resources and you say, oh, which HTML element is best fits this? Oh, I can read about that. Okay, great. I need to make this element, this HTML element, move this way or look this way. Let me look at the CSS stuff. Oh, which CSS rules are going to fit? So both of those are just big toolboxes that you can use. And these are about understanding how to figure out what to make, for what reasons, and then you reach for the tools. So these are the books that I consider, even though they're not HTML and CSS books, these are the best books for HTML and CSS to learn them. Then I'd pepper in these babies right here, Buy one of these and read it along with it while you're learning, while you're using Exercises for Programmers, while you're using the Mozilla Developer documentation. Go and read on the side for fun some of these JavaScript books, and maybe in there you'll say, oh, wow, this is a cool way of filtering lists. There's an exercise in here that was talking about filtering lists. Maybe this would be a fun way to do it. The other thing you should do is get a friend or a mentor or somebody who you know, or pay somebody, or find a couple friends who all want to learn this at the same time. And with these books right here, I like this one the best, but that's just me. These 4 books here and the Mozilla Developer Network resources, that is the magic. That's the best books, I think, for you if you want to learn web development. And I don't know, what's that, $120? I mean, sure, it's not free, but that's nothing. That's crazy. That will save you probably $60,000 of your time and effort in trying to learn this stuff, and then you won't learn it all terribly, which is another great thing, because every time you learn a bad habit from copying a tutorial and using some Bootstrap and copying this and copying that you're going to end up in Stack Overflow asking a question like, why doesn't my box fit in the box? And your whole conceptual model for what and why we make things on the web is going to be distorted and probably stuck like that forever. So, find some friends, get this collection of books, follow the challenges. There's lots of places on the internet you can ask for help. Stack Overflow is not one of them. You should not be asking for help on Stack Overflow until you can complete this entire book. That's what I think. If you can complete this book, you're allowed to ask questions on Stack Overflow, but make sure you understand how it works. It's not for saying, why does my code not work? It's for asking a question that is universal and timeless, that can actually be answered, and that is helpful for everyone in the world. That's why people on Stack Overflow are so snippy when you're new and you go to Stack Overflow. That's not what it's for. If you want help with JavaScript, go to the JavaScript Discord. Look that up on the web. And if you want help, I'll put a note in the thing. And if you want help with HTML and CSS, join the CSS Discord. You can ask questions like, why doesn't my box go in my box there? And people won't jump down your throat. So that's the end. Those are the books. If you ever want to talk about it, you can reach out to me directly. I give out free career advice, multiple slots a day. And I hope that these books help you, and I hope that you choose to use these books instead of find some sort of quick tutorial copy paste stuff, because you're going to be the people building the stuff for the web that I have to deal with for the rest of my life. And so please do a good job. It's very important that you build things well and with understanding of all the tools and how they affect people, and with accessibility in mind, and just do a really good job, and that you act as a gatekeeper for all of the crap that all of the business people in the world want to build. So take responsibility for what you put into the world. Those are my suggestions. All right, let me just add a few notes, because as much as I love these books, I'm not saying that there aren't some amazing online resources. I already talked about the Mozilla Developer Network references for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But there's lots of other things, like, for example, CSS Tricks is a website all devoted to all of the neat tricks you can do with CSS, and it has a whole almanac, and it has a really good flexbox and grid cheat sheet. That's really great. I actually learned programming basically from a Chris Coyier WordPress course back in like 2002 or something, which was really great. And his way of teaching, where he went to go make a WordPress website, but he first made the HTML page and walked through, oh, I'm putting this here because of this reason, and these are where I want my widgets to be, and this is how I'm going to show them my widgets, because they're going to want to see all these different, that it was a widget company was the website, but here's all the products we're showing, and here's where the navigation's going to be. He walked through it with such care and intention, and really did a lot of what these Don't Make Me Think and what Elements of User Experience did by just showing his professionalism and his experience. And then he took that HTML page, and then he showed you how you could make a dynamic WordPress theme out of it, instead of talking like WordPress theme is one whole other thing and HTML is some other thing. He was able to weave why we're making the page, how we're making the page, and then how we now make that page dynamic. And I think that learning from that video on lynda.com definitely set me up for success as far as how I think about learning all these things and how I think about and how I teach people these things nowadays. So there's lots of online courses and things that can be super helpful. It's true. I think that sometimes those can be taken in tandem with these books. But more and more, what I'm seeing is these fast track, quick, learn all about complex JavaScript frameworks, toss in Bootstrap and these CSS frameworks to get this half finished code from somewhere, put it all together, get it up from GitHub, and there's just all of a sudden, as a new person, you're having to deal with the framework and the build tools and everything of like an enterprise level application. And I think that it's really harmful to the student, and then in turn harmful to the industry, which is and then in turn harmful to humanity, because we have got thousands of business students who are doing what they get taught in school, which is figure out the bottom line and make as much money as possible. And we've got a lot of coding students who learned how to like code up whatever they're told, and they do whatever the business person tells them to do, and then we get a bunch of shit in the world. Also, on the other hand, think about it like this. There's two ways of teaching. There's a way of teaching that's easy for the teacher. So if I give you a bunch of automated tests and you go learn how to use GitHub repositories and version control, and you learn how to run node build tools, then it's really easy for me as a teacher to just give you a bunch of stuff and then, let you do it on your own. But on the other hand, there's what is the best way to teach the student? And that's what I'm interested in, not even for my teaching personally, not for my business, but for everyone. I think everybody needs to refocus on what is going to teach the student to be the best that they can be. And so I'll just leave you with that.